Learning is a process of construction of knowledge, construction of strategies, construction of self, and construction of your world. In this video, we'll discuss the first part, construction of knowledge. First of all, what's the difference between information and knowledge? Knowledge is well-formed ideas and understandings. Information happens when people transform their knowledge into a form that can be communicated to other people. If you'll forgive the oversimplification, information is noun-like and knowledge is verb-like. Many people do not differentiate knowledge and information. They use these words as synonyms. This isn't usually a problem, but when it comes to teaching and learning, it leads to big problems. I have done a number of large research projects in which I investigated how people define learning. The vast majority of people define learning as the acquisition of knowledge. If knowledge and information were exactly the same, this might make sense. But when we think deeply about the difference, we quickly realize that acquisition of knowledge is impossible. Why? Because this implies that knowledge can be transferred from one human mind into another human mind. And that's just not the way human brains and minds work. Scientists have found something interesting. If you put someone inside a brain scanning machine and ask them to do a specific task, the images of their brain activity show very specific patterns. If you bring them back a few weeks later, put them in the brain scanning machine, and ask them to remember doing the task, the images of their brain activity show similar patterns as when they actually did the activities. In other words, when you form an understanding, you construct it. And every time you remember it, you reconstruct it slightly differently. Put another way, memories are reconstructions, and making memories is a process of constructing them. Knowledge is constructed. The knowledge in any human mind cannot be transferred to another human mind, but humans can translate their knowledge into information. That information can then be used by other people. And in using it, they construct their own new ideas and understandings, their own knowledge. So what is learning if it's not acquisition of knowledge? Learning involves two simultaneous processes. First, learning involves the construction of meaning. This construction process is incredibly complex and wonderful, involving things like experiences, interests, attention, exploration, and experimentation. And information. What is information in relation to learning? Information is the raw material we use to construct knowledge. Second, when you construct new meaning, you are changing, you are becoming. Becoming the sort of person who understands something. Becoming the sort of person who can do something you weren't able to do before. Becoming more of an expert. Becoming a member of the group of people who understand these sorts of things and do these sorts of things. In my research, I have also investigated how learning designers and educators define learning and teaching. Again, we find the problem of equating information and knowledge. Most of the people I studied said that learning is transferring knowledge to learners. Again, this is impossible. If we differentiate knowledge and information, we see that learning, design, and education can involve translating our knowledge into information. Learners can then use that information as raw materials for constructing their own new knowledge. In this sense, part of a learning designer's or educator's job is information design. But learning isn't just about constructing knowledge. It's also about becoming. and information design alone isn't going to help learners learn. There was a time in history when teachers were the primary source of information. Then along came textbooks, and no longer were teachers given the primary responsibility of translating their knowledge into information. Then came the internet, and the world was awash with information. Information overload. And not all of the information was reliable. Educators had to help learners with what they called critical thinking, evaluating information in terms of the reliability of the source of information, the assumptions inherent in the information, how the information might be used, and so on. This was very important, but it still focuses on information. It doesn't address the second aspect of learning, becoming. Educators and designers also have to do learning design work. They have to design the environments, structures, activities, and relationships through which learners can engage in both construction of knowledge and becoming. The job of any educator, such as a learning experience designer, learning engineer, learning architect, educational leader, teacher, or even parent, requires analysis of any given situation to determine what the situation calls for. Does it require information design work? Learning design work? A mixture? And if so, what kind of mixture? One way of figuring out what a situation calls for is to think about the differences between the features of information design and the features of learning design. Information design uses previously existing information or previously existing knowledge transformed into information. Learning design is organic and context-based. Information design is about delivery and presentation. This means that learners are receiving the information. But receiving information is not learning. Learning experience design gets learners working to construct knowledge. They may use information, but they are the active agents. Imagine this scenario. You decide to get in top physical shape, so you go to your local gym and hire a personal trainer. You say to the trainer, "You have 6 months to get me in top physical shape. I'll be back in 6 months to check on your progress." That would be absurd. The same is true of learning. In this metaphor, you as the learning designer are the personal trainer. You have to get your learners doing the hard work of learning. This hard work involves cognitive activity, but it also includes non-cognitive aspects, including emotions, mindsets, and interpersonal relationships. Once your information design is complete, it becomes static. The information is set in stone, at least until a future iteration. In learning designs, the knowledge work is dynamic and continually changing. Furthermore, this dynamic work is not isolated inside individual human minds. It is distributed between multiple human minds, activities, contexts, tools, and a large number of other interacting elements. As an information designer, you have authority. And by translating your knowledge into information, your information becomes authoritative. Learning designers recognize that effective designs put learners in a position of authority. Think for a moment about the term authority. You may notice that this word includes the concept of author. In information design, you are the author of information. In learning design, your learners are the authors of knowledge. Another difference between information design and learning design is in the directionality. The information flow is one way in information design. But in learning design, the directionality is interactive. Meanings are negotiated during the knowledge construction process. When we think of information, we often think of the media. Information design is media design. Learning design is mediation design. Knowledge construction processes are mediated by tools, symbols, contextual factors, and interpersonal relationships. Information is episodic. When people cram for exams, they are using information without learning anything. As soon as the episode, the exam, the course, the program is finished, the information is no longer needed and is forgotten. Learning, on the other hand, is long-term. Remembering has very little to do with learning. You can remember information without learning. Information comes and goes, but learning is becoming. Once you change as a person, there is no going back. Now that we have seen some of the differences between features of learning design and information design, we can look at another area of difference: the purposes and goals. As we have seen, problems arise when you are doing information design, but think you are doing learning design. These problems can be alleviated if we are clear about the purposes and goals of each. Why do we do learning design work? To facilitate learning, of course. Can information design facilitate learning? No, but information design is often necessary to provide the raw material which learners will use to construct their own meanings. So the primary goal of information design is to translate knowledge into information. Another possible goal is to provide background or set the stage, to provide a common frame in which learners can better understand each other as they negotiate meanings. Information design can also be used to inspire. Think of the power of TED Talks. They are information design and contain lots of information. Useful information for some people, maybe not for others, but often they are very inspiring. They get people into the right frame of mind to go out and get to work learning. The primary goal of learning design is to facilitate learning, but some of the goals involved in facilitating learning are things like helping learners with identity exploration and development, or becoming an expert. What limitations do we have to deal with when doing information design? When doing learning design? Recognizing limitations can help us have clarity in our work. One of the limitations of information design is that this alone is not sufficient for learning. You've probably taken classes where you are expected to read a textbook, listen to some lectures, and then take exams to make sure you learned. These kinds of classes sometimes were the product of information design alone, without any learning design, because they were based on the problematic assumption that delivering well-designed information is enough for learning to happen. Another limitation of information design is that it will always be received differently by different people. People interpret information through the lens of their prior experiences, prior knowledge, mindsets, identities, and contexts. Therefore, no two learners will be alike in how they experience the information you have designed. Furthermore, because information designs are static, they can't meet all the needs of a particular context. One of the most misunderstood limitations of learning design is about assessment. Because learning is becoming, and learning is the construction of knowledge. After going through a learning experience you have designed, each learner will be different. Not only different than they were before, but also different from one another. And as a group, they will have collaboratively constructed knowledge, but each individual will have their own unique construction. Therefore, it is logically impossible to quantify and measure learning objectively. Furthermore, standardization is also a logical impossibility, because each learner comes into the designed learning experience with a unique set of identities, prior knowledge constructions, and attitudes. And after the experience will have a newly constructed or reconstructed set of identities, knowledge, attitudes, and dispositions. In other words, in learning design, you can anticipate certain general outcomes, but you can't predict or prescribe learning outcomes. As architects of learning experiences, our challenge is not to build repositories of information, but to design worlds where knowledge flourishes, and learners are authors as they create the best versions of themselves.